Welcome back to week 10, and in video 3 we are going to explore some of the different types of communities found in the world's oceans. So we've already kind of talked about 4 main types, so the beach environment, the rocky intertidal, the deep ocean, divergent plate boundaries, those mid-ocean ridges, and estuaries. But we're going to get into some more detail here in 2 main categories: the open ocean beyond the continental shelf, and then the coastal waters above or within the continental shelf. So hopefully that term continental shelf sounds familiar to you. So this is the area that basically you have relatively shallow water to a certain point, and then it drastically drops off towards the deep ocean, to the ocean basins below. So in the open ocean we have a few different categories. So we have these pelagic organisms or communities, and then benthic. So these 2 terms should be familiar from you from last week. And then within pelagic we've got photic and aphotic, and then coastal waters we've got subtidal and the intertidal. So in the open ocean, if we take a look at a cross-section of the ocean system going from the sea surface to the sea floor, our photic pelagic community here is going to be in the uppermost column of water. So shallow water, this is where light can penetrate, that term photic. We've got organisms here that need light to survive. The aphotic zone is below that, and this is where water does not have light, so that sunlight doesn't actually penetrate deep enough. So these organisms don't rely on light at all. And then benthic organisms live on the seafloor, either attached or move along the seafloor surface. So these are the 3 main categories in the oceans, in the open ocean, that is. And then there's another one here. If you we've got nectonic, planktonic also would fit in here as well. So the photic organisms, things like kelp, phytoplankton, diatoms, all rely on light that actually do photosynthesis to produce their own food. These are all good examples, and when we go to the coast you'll actually be able to see the kelp growing on the seafloor and kind of stretching up through that photic zone. We can have these organisms that are kind of close to the shore, but also some of these can live out in the ocean as well. So you don't necessarily have to have just microscopic organisms. You can have these big kind of beds of these kind of seaweed, as people call it, floating around in the ocean as well. They don't necessarily have to be attached. A lot of them have little bladders in them. We'll kind of play around with these hopefully at the coast. You guys saw this, and the little bladders have air in them to help that stuff float and keep it up close to the sea surface. The aphotic zone, these organisms don't need light. They rely on chemosynthesis, or they rely on decomposers for their food. A lot of these organisms that you see here actually can produce their own light. So they actually will have this fluorescence, green, red, blue, all different types of what's called bioluminescence. Pretty neat stuff. And these guys, no need for light. They are totally fine down in the deep ocean. These were some of the really neat recent findings that NOAA found in these deep ocean explorations using those ROVs, the remotely operated vehicles. And then benthic organisms, these are organisms that are either attached or living on the seafloor. Things like these tube worms that are attached to these hydrothermal vents, these black smokers. There's clams, there's crabs as well, and then one of these crustaceans, just absolutely huge critter that's crawling along on the ocean floor. Pretty amazing stuff. So those are our organisms that live in the open ocean in benthic, photic, and aphotic pelagic environments. So our coastal waters, when we get closer to the edge of a continent, this is going to be above or within the continental shelf. We've got subtidal, which is a zone that's not affected by tides. So here we can see low tide in blue, high tide in green. Subtidal zone is below low tide. So those organisms are not going to be affected by tides at all. So they don't have to deal with being exposed to air at all. Whereas the intertidal zone, where we went on our field trip, these organisms are in that tide zone, and they are periodically above and below sea level, at least once, maybe twice a day. So some examples. So not only do we have the subtidal and intertidal, these are going to be areas in the water. So this is the rocky intertidal kind of area. We also can put estuaries into these categories. They have subtidal and intertidal zones as well. And then in sandy beach environments, you can have this also. You see the most variation, however, in these rocky intertidal environments. So the intertidal, this should look familiar to you guys. This is where we've got rocky areas where tide pools exist. Tide goes out, organisms are exposed, pools of water are left behind, water evaporates out, water heats up, so our temperatures can fluctuate and our salinity can fluctuate as well. So these organisms have to adapt, like these sea anemones are all kind of curled up and holding water inside them so they don't dry out. And these sea stars here are doing the same thing. They're stuck to the wall. They're trying not to move around too much because their movement relies on this kind of tube vascular system where they need water to suction cup themselves onto things. So, and as well, these mussels are doing the same thing. They're closing themselves up so that they don't dry out. And then the subtidal, so things like kelp forests, where these guys don't necessarily get exposed to the air at low tide. They're below that low tide mark. Coral reefs are good examples as well. So these are areas that are not affected by tides at all. They stay submerged by the ocean at all times. So those are some of the main types of communities found in the oceans. There are plenty more, but we just kind of covered the basics for this class. So thank you very much for a great term and awesome field trips, and I will sign off and thank you very much.